Hello everyone, and welcome back to Spring Java Lab. In today's video, we are going to solve a very interesting real-world use case. We will look at how to download CSV files from a remote SFTP server using Spring integration, and as soon as the download is complete, automatically trigger a Spring Batch job to process those files. I will be writing all the code from scratch right here on screen, so let's build this together step by step. First, let's head over to start.spring.io to generate our project skeleton. I am going to fill in the project metadata right now. Let's set it up. The group will be com.springjavalab. The artifact will be Spring Integration SFTP download. We will select Java 21 and Maven. Now, let's click on Add Dependencies. First, we need Spring Integration to handle our SFTP messaging flow. Next, we will search for and add Spring Batch for our chunk-based processing and job management. We will add Lombok to reduce our boilerplate code. Finally, we need a database driver to store our Spring Batch metadata, so I will add the Oracle driver, and we'll also pull in Spring Data JDBC to handle the transaction management. Alright, the configuration is complete. Let's click Generate, download the zip file, and open it up in our IDE. Now that our project is open, there is one more very important dependency we need. The Spring Initializr gives us the core integration starter, but for SFTP specifically, we need to add the Spring Integration SFTP module manually. Let's open our pom.xml and add this inside the dependencies block. Let's save that and let Maven sync. Now that our dependencies are sorted, let's configure our application properties. I'll open the application.properties file and start by giving our application a name. Next, we need to add our SFTP server details. For this tutorial, I am using a cloud SFTP service. I will define the host, port, user credentials, and the directory paths. Here, sftp.remote.directory is the folder on our remote server where the CSV files will be dropped, and sftp.local.directory is my local machine's path where Spring Integration will download these files. Moving on, because we are using Spring Batch, it requires a database to store its job execution metadata. I am using a local Oracle database for this. Let's add the data source configurations. We provide the JDBC URL, username, password, and the Oracle driver class name so Spring Boot can automatically configure our data source. Finally, there is one very crucial property we must add: spring.batch.job.enabled equals false by default. A Spring Boot application will automatically try to execute any defined batch jobs as soon as the application starts. We absolutely do not want that. We only want our batch job to run after our files are successfully downloaded from the SFTP server. Setting this property to false disables the auto-run feature and gives us manual control to trigger the job programmatically. Alright, now let's create the Spring Batch job that will be triggered once our Spring IntegrationFlow downloads the files. Inside the config package, I'll create a new class called SimpleBatchConfig. First, I'll annotate it with a configuration since this class will contain our batch bean definitions. I'll also add Lombox at SLF4J annotation so we can log messages without creating a logger manually. Now let's create our first step. I'll define a @bean method called printFileNameStep. Since we're using Spring Batch 5, this method requires a job repository and a platform transaction manager. I'll create a new step builder, give the step the name printFileNameStep. And since we only need to execute a small piece of logic, a tasklet is all we need here. Inside the tasklet, the first thing we need is the download directory. Later, our Spring IntegrationFlow will launch this job and pass the local download path as a job parameter. So I'll get the directory parameter from the chunk context and convert it to a string. Next, I'll create a Java file object pointing to that directory. Now let's list all the CSV files inside this folder. I'll use list files, with a simple filename filter so we only pick files ending with .csv. Before processing them, let's handle the case where no files are available. If the array is null or its length is 0, I'll simply log no CSV file found and return repeat_status.finished. Otherwise, let's log how many CSV files were found. Then I'll loop through each file and simply log its name. Right now we're only printing the file names. In a real application, this is where you'd read the file and perform your business processing. But for this example we just want to verify that our batch job receives the downloaded files correctly. Finally, I'll return repeat_status.finished, pass in the transaction manager, and build the step. Now that the step is ready, let's create the batch job. I'll define another at bean called processFileJob. This method takes the job repository and our printFileName step. Using the job builder, I'll name the job processFileJob, start it with printFileName step, and finally call build. And that's it. Our batch job is ready. At the moment, this job doesn't run by itself. In the next step, we'll configure Spring integration so that whenever files are downloaded from the SFTP server, it automatically launches this batch job and passes the download directory as a job parameter. Now comes the interesting part. So far we've created our batch job, but nothing is actually triggering it. Let's configure Spring integration to connect to our SFTP server, download any new CSV files, and then launch the batch job automatically. I'll create a new class called SFTPConfig inside the config package. First, let's annotate it with @configuration. I'll also add @requiredArgs constructor since we'll be using constructor injection, and @slf4j for logging. Next, I'll inject two dependencies. The first one is JobOperator. We'll use this to launch our Spring Batch job programmatically. The second dependency is the processFileJob bean that we created in the previous step. Now let's inject all of our SFTP configuration values from application.properties. I'll use @value for the host, port, username, password, the remote directory, and finally the local download directory. With the configuration in place, let's create the SFTPSessionFactory. I'll create a bean called SFTPSessionFactory. Inside, I'll create a new default SFTP session factory, enable shared sessions by passing true, and then configure the host, port, username, and password using the values we just injected. For this demo, I'll also enable allow unknown keys so we don't have to configure host keys. In production, you would typically validate the server's host key instead. Now the session factory is ready. Next, let's build our integration flow. I'll create another bean called SFTP download flow that accepts the session factory. We'll return an integration flow. To start the flow, I'll use from supplier. The supplier simply returns the remote directory followed by /star.csv, so we're only looking for CSV files. I'll also configure a poller with a fixed delay of 5 seconds. That means Spring integration will check the remote SFTP directory every 5 seconds for new files. Now let's add our first handler. Here I'll use the SFTP outbound gateway. I'll pass in the session factory, use the mget command, and use the payload as the remote file expression. Next, I'll specify the local download directory using the value from our properties. I'll also configure the delete option. This means that after a file is downloaded successfully, it will be removed from the remote SFTP server so it isn't downloaded again during the next poll. Once the download completes, the payload received by the next handler will contain the downloaded files. So let's add another handle, method. Inside, I'll cast the payload to a list file. The first thing I'll check is whether the list is empty. If no new files were downloaded, I'll simply log a debug message saying no new files were found and return null to end the flow. If we do have downloaded files, it's time to launch our Spring Batch job. I'll create a new job parameters builder. The first parameter is a timestamp using the current system time. This ensures every job execution is unique. Then I'll add another parameter called directory and pass our local download directory. Finally, I'll build the job parameters. Now let's start the batch job. I'll wrap this in a try-catch block. Using the job operator, I'll call start, pass the processFileJob, and provide the job parameters we just created. If anything goes wrong while starting the job, we'll simply log the exception. Finally, I'll return null from the handler and complete the integration flow by calling .get. And that's it. Our integration flow is now complete. Every 5 seconds, Spring integration checks the remote SFTP directory for new CSV files. If files are found, they're downloaded into our local directory, removed from the SFTP server, and immediately afterward our Spring Batch job is launched to process those downloaded files. With everything wired together, we're now ready to run the application and see the complete end-to-end flow in action. My Spring Boot application is already up and running. Since we've configured our poller with a fixed delay of 5 seconds, Spring integration is continuously monitoring the remote SFTP directory for new CSV files. As you can see, the remote directory is currently empty. Now let's upload a few files. I'm uploading 2 CSV files, employees1.csv and employees2.csv. Along with these, I'm also uploading one PDF file. I'm including the PDF intentionally because I want to verify that our integration flow picks up only CSV files and ignores everything else. Perfect. The upload is complete. Now let's wait for the next polling cycle. There it is. Our integration flow has detected the new CSV files and immediately triggered the Spring Batch job. The job starts successfully, and if we scroll down, our tasklet finds two CSV files and prints both file names, employees1.csv and employees2.csv. Finally, the job completes with the status completed, which means the entire flow executed successfully. Now let's verify the result. On the local side, you can see both CSV files have been downloaded successfully. And if we look at the remote SFTP directory, only the PDF file is left. This confirms that our integration flow downloaded only the CSV files, ignored the PDF file, and removed the downloaded files from the remote server because we configured the outbound gateway with the delete option. So, our end-to-end flow is working exactly as expected. Spring Integration detects new files on the SFTP server, downloads them, and immediately triggers our Spring Batch job for processing. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and learned something new. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends and colleagues, and subscribe to the channel for more Spring Boot, Spring Batch, and Spring Integration tutorials.